There are stories you were meant to hear, tales of heroes, triumphs, and gods smiling down from Olympus. And then there are the other stories, the ones whispered in shadows, scratched into fragments of pottery, or buried so deep in myth that even the poets hesitated to retell them. These are the myths never meant for mortals. They are darker, stranger, and far less flattering to the gods than the polished versions you've heard. They tell of betrayals that split families, punishments that make nightmares look merciful, and secrets the Olympians would rather you forget. Imagine sitting in a candlelit room, the flame flickering, while someone leans in and says, "There are things about Zeus you were never supposed to know." That's the kind of story we're about to wander into. The Greeks were master storytellers, but they also understood the power of silence. Some myths were celebrated in epic poems, carved into temple walls, and sung at festivals. Others were tucked away, erased, or softened into allegory. Why? Because they revealed too much the cruelty of the gods, the fragility of heroes, the chaos lurking beneath the order of Olympus. These hidden myths remind us that the gods were not perfect beings. They were powerful, yes, but also jealous, vengeful, and sometimes absurdly petty. To hear these stories is to see the divine stripped of its glamour, leaving behind something raw and unsettling. This journey will not be fast. It will be slow, deliberate, and perhaps even a little boring, the kind of slow burn that makes your eyelids heavy. We will wander through chaos, monsters, curses, and betrayals, explaining each step with the patience of a sleepy historian. But don't mistake the pace for safety. These myths are sharp, even when told softly. They are the kind of tales that linger in the back of your mind, waiting to resurface when the room is dark and quiet. So, settle in, pull the blanket tighter. Let the words stretch out like the shadows of an ancient temple. Tonight, we begin with the myths never meant for mortals, the stories hidden in the cracks of history, waiting for someone brave or sleepy enough to listen. And remember, this is only the beginning. 19 more chapters await, each darker than the last. Like and subscribe, and let me know from where you're watching, preferably not from the underworld, because internet down there is terrible. Before the gods, before the titans, before even the monsters that slithered in shadows, there was chaos. Not chaos in the modern sense of noisy traffic or messy bedrooms, but chaos as the Greeks imagined it, a yawning, endless void, a place where nothing existed, and yet everything waited to be born. Picture it slowly. No sky, no sea, no earth, no light, just a vast, silent emptiness. If you've ever stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering why you can't sleep, you've already had a taste of chaos. From chaos, the first beings emerged. They were not gods in the way we think of Zeus or Hera, but raw forces of existence. Gaia, Earth, the solid ground, the mother of all. Nyx night, darkness itself, draped across the void. Erebus shadow, the gloom that filled the spaces between. Tartarus, the deep abyss, later the prison of monsters and titans. Eros desire, not the playful Cupid of later myths, but the primal force that bound things together. These beings were not born in a nursery. They simply were. The Greeks imagined them as the scaffolding of reality, the first bricks laid in the construction of existence. Chaos was not evil. It was not even hostile. It was simply the absence of order. But to the Greeks, that absence was terrifying. They believed that without balance, without mat for the Egyptians, Without logos for the philosophers, the world could collapse back into chaos. This fear lingered in their myths. Every battle between gods and monsters, every punishment in the underworld, every prophecy that unraveled bloodlines was a reminder. Order is fragile, and chaos is always waiting. Chaos becomes oddly funny. Imagine trying to describe it to a friend. So, what was there before the world? Nothing, like empty space. No, not even space. So, nothing, exactly. It's the kind of conversation that makes you laugh nervously before realizing you're actually terrified. From chaos came Gaia, and from Gaia came Uranus, and from Uranus came the Titans. The void gave way to family drama, betrayals, and battles that would shape the myths forever. But it all began here, in the silence of the primordial void. So, as you drift deeper into this sleepy saga, remember, before the gods, there was nothing. And sometimes, nothing is the scariest thing of all. From the silence of chaos and the shaping of Gaia and Uranus came not only gods and titans, but beings that embodied dread itself. These were the monsters, creatures whose existence reminded mortals and immortals alike that creation was never free from shadow. The first of these were the hecatontures, giants with 100 hands and 50 heads. Their sheer enormity was overwhelming, so much so that even their parents recoiled in fear. They were locked away in the depths of the earth, hidden from sight, because their power was too great to be tolerated. Alongside them came the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants whose gaze was as unsettling as their strength. Though later they would forge weapons for the gods, in their earliest form they were feared as embodiments of raw, untamed force. Yet the cycle of creation did not stop there. From Gaia and Tartarus emerged Typhon, a storm serpent whose body towered over mountains, whose voice shook the heavens, and whose breath was fire itself. Typhon's challenge to Zeus would mark one of the most terrifying battles in myth, a struggle between order and chaos embodied in living form. These monsters were not accidents, they were inevitabilities. They were the shadows of creation, reminders that every act of order carried with it the seed of disorder. To the Greeks, they were proof that the universe was not a peaceful place, but a battlefield where terror was born alongside beauty. The monsters also served a symbolic role. The hecatontures represented overwhelming force, the Cyclopes, the danger of singular vision, Typhon, the fury of nature itself. Each creature was more than a nightmare. It was a lesson, a warning carved into myth. And so the stage was set. The gods would rise, but they would rise against a backdrop of chaos embodied in flesh and bone. The monsters were already waiting in the wings, ready to challenge, ready to terrify, ready to remind everyone that darkness was never far away. Zeus, king of the Olympian gods, is often remembered as the wielder of thunderbolts, the ruler of the skies, and the arbiter of divine justice. Yet beneath the polished image of authority lies a darker record, a collection of deeds and secrets that the poets rarely sang aloud. These forgotten crimes reveal a god who was not simply a protector, but also a manipulator, a deceiver, and at times a destroyer. One of the earliest shadows cast upon Zeus was his rise to power itself. To overthrow his father Cronus, he relied on cunning and betrayal, rallying his siblings and unleashing the imprisoned Cyclopes to forge weapons of war. Victory brought him the throne, but it also set a precedent. Power was taken, not given, and bloodlines were fractured by violence. The legacy of patricide haunted Olympus. Even as Zeus claimed to embody order, Zeus' crimes extended beyond the battlefield. His countless disguises and pursuits of mortals and nymphs left trails of sorrow. Women transformed into animals, hidden in forests, or consumed by divine radiance, were victims of his relentless desire. The stories of Europa, Lydda, and Semele are remembered, but many others were erased. Their names lost to time, their tragedies buried beneath the grandeur of Olympus. Each tale carried the same theme: the king of the gods bending the mortal world to his will, leaving behind curses, broken families, and children destined for suffering. There were darker myths too, whispered but seldom recorded. Some spoke of Zeus punishing entire cities with storms and plagues when offerings displeased him. Others hinted at secret rivalries with his own children, where fear of being overthrown led him to schemes as ruthless as those of Cronus. These stories were not celebrated in temples. They were warnings, reminders that the gods were not bound by mortal morality. The forgotten crimes of Zeus revealed the duality of his reign. He was both protector and predator, both giver of justice and source of chaos. To the Greeks, this was not contradiction, but truth. Power itself is dangerous, and even the greatest of gods carried shadows. And so, the myths that were never meant for mortals remind us that Zeus' throne was built not only on thunder and glory, but also on secrets, betrayals and crimes that echo through the darker corners of Greek mythology. Hera, queen of the gods and wife of Zeus, is often remembered as the goddess of marriage and protector of women. Yet beneath her regal image lies a legacy of vengeance so fierce that it shaped some of the darkest myths of Greece. Her wrath was not random. It was fueled by betrayal, humiliation, and the endless infidelities of Zeus. Each act of revenge carried with it a cruelty that echoed through generations. One of her most infamous deeds was the torment of Io, a mortal priestess loved by Zeus. To hide Io from Hera's suspicion, Zeus transformed her into a cow. Hera, not deceived, demanded the cow as a gift and set the 100-eyed giant Argus to guard her. Even after Hermes slew Argus, Hera sent a gadfly to sting Io endlessly, driving her across the world in misery. Io's suffering was not her fault, yet Hera's vengeance fell upon her simply for being caught in Zeus' desire. Another tale tells of Semele, a mortal woman who bore Zeus' child. Hera disguised herself and tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal his true divine form. When Zeus did, his radiance consumed her, leaving only the unborn Dionysus to be saved. Semele's destruction was not caused by her own weakness, but by Hera's cunning, a revenge that claimed a life and scarred a lineage. Hera's cruelty extended even to children. The hero, Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene, was marked from birth by her hatred. She sent serpents to kill him in his cradle, and when he grew, she drove him into madness, causing him to slay his own family. His 12 labors, often celebrated as feats of strength, were, in truth, punishments born of Hera's relentless pursuit. Her vengeance was not limited to mortals. Even rival gods felt her fury. She conspired against Zeus himself, binding him with chains in a plot that nearly toppled Olympus. Though the plan failed, it revealed the depth of her resentment and the lengths she would go to reclaim dignity in a marriage defined by betrayal. Hera's darkest acts of revenge remind us that the gods were not paragons of virtue, but beings of passion, jealousy, and wrath. Her cruelty was born of pain, Yet it left trails of suffering across myths, shaping destinies and destroying lives. In her, the Greeks saw both the protector of marriage and the embodiment of vengeance, a goddess whose shadow was as powerful as her crown. Love in Greek mythology was rarely gentle, and when it involved the gods, it was often cursed. The Olympians, with their immense power and unchecked desires, pursued mortals and immortals alike, leaving behind stories of passion twisted into tragedy. These tales reveal not only the intensity of divine love, but also the destruction it carried, for the gods' affections were as dangerous as their wrath. One of the most haunting examples is the story of Apollo and Daphne. Apollo, struck by the arrow of desire, chased the nymph Daphne through forests and rivers. Her pleas for escape were answered not by freedom, but by transformation. She became a laurel tree, rooted to the earth, forever beyond Apollo's reach. His love became a curse, binding him to mourn her absence while wearing her leaves as a crown. Another tale tells of Aphrodite and Adonis, a mortal youth whose beauty captivated the goddess of love. Their union seemed blessed, but Adonis was fated to die, gored by a wild boar. Aphrodite's grief was eternal, and from his blood sprang the anemone flower, a fragile reminder that divine love could not protect against mortality. The curse of their love was not punishment, but inevitability, the reminder that even gods could not defy fate. Zeus himself left trails of cursed loves across myth. Europa, carried away by him in the form of a bull, bore children destined for conflict. Each union carried consequences, not blessings, and the mortals involved were often left broken, transformed, or destroyed. Even among the gods, love was dangerous. Their affair led to humiliation when Hephaestus trapped them in an unbreakable net, exposing their shame before Olympus. Love among immortals was no safer than love between gods and mortals. It was a force that bound, betrayed, and cursed. It was a force that transformed bodies, destroyed families, and carved sorrow into the fabric of myth. To the Greeks, these stories were warnings. Love could be divine, but it could also be fatal. Beneath the earth, hidden from the light of Olympus and the mortal world, lay the Greek underworld, a realm ruled by Hades, filled with shadows, punishments, and secrets that terrified even the bravest souls. To the Greeks, death was not an end, but a passage, and the underworld was the destination where every soul, noble or wicked, eventually arrived. Yet within its depths, horror waited at every turn. Souls were ferried across by Charon, the grim boatman, who demanded payment in the form of a coin placed in the mouth of the deceased. Beyond the river lay the gates of Hades, guarded by Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound whose jaws ensured no soul could escape. The fields of punishment were reserved for those who had committed crimes against the gods, where eternal tortures awaited. The Elysian fields, rare and distant, offered peace to heroes and the righteous, though few ever reached them. The horrors of the underworld were most vividly seen in its punishments. Tantalus, cursed with eternal hunger and thirst, stood surrounded by food and water that vanished whenever he reached. Sisyphus, condemned to roll his boulder up the hill only for it to fall back again, embodied futility itself. The underworld was also home to rivers beyond Styx: Acheron, the river of sorrow; Phlegethon, the river of fire; Cocytus, the river of wailing; and Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, where souls drank to erase memory before reincarnation. Each river carried its own terror, shaping the landscape into a labyrinth of despair. Every soul faced judgment, every crime carried weight, and every act of defiance echoed beyond life. The horrors of the underworld were not simply punishments. They were lessons carved into eternity, warnings that the gods' authority extended even into death. The Greek underworld was not only a place of shadows and rivers. It was also the stage for punishments so cruel and unending that they became symbols of despair itself. These were not ordinary sentences, nor were they designed to correct behavior. They were eternal reminders of defiance against the gods, punishments worse than death, carved into myth to terrify mortals and warn them of divine wrath. Among the most infamous was Tantalus, once favored by the gods, who betrayed their trust by stealing ambrosia and nectar from Olympus and offering it to mortals. In some versions, he even served his own son as a meal to test the gods' omniscience. His punishment was eternal hunger and thirst. He stood in a pool of water, with fruit hanging above him, yet whenever he reached, the water receded and the branches lifted away. His torment was not pain but endless denial, a thirst and hunger that could never be satisfied. Then there was Ixion, a mortal king who committed crimes against both men and gods. He murdered his father-in-law, and when Zeus offered him forgiveness, Ixion repaid the favor with betrayal. Attempting to seduce Hera, for this, he was bound to a flaming wheel that spun endlessly through the void. His punishment was motion without rest, fire without release, a cycle that mirrored his treachery. Perhaps the most famous of all was Sisyphus, the cunning king who tricked death itself. Twice he escaped the underworld, binding Thanatos and deceiving Persephone. His cleverness was unmatched, but the gods would not tolerate defiance. His punishment was to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only for it to fall back each time he neared the summit. The task was eternal, the futility absolute. His story became the ultimate symbol of endless labor, effort without reward, struggle without hope. These punishments were not simply cruel inventions, they were lessons. Tantalus warned against arrogance and betrayal of divine trust. Ixion reminded mortals that forgiveness from the gods was not to be abused. Sisyphus showed that cleverness without humility led only to futility. Each punishment was worse than death because it denied the soul peace, trapping it in cycles of torment that stretched into eternity. The Greeks understood that death was inevitable, but they feared these punishments more than death itself. To be condemned to hunger, fire, or futility forever was to lose not only life, but meaning. In these myths, the gods revealed their power, not through mercy, but through the creation of horrors that echoed across generations. Warnings carved into the very structure of the underworld. Hades, lord of the underworld, was unlike his brothers Zeus and Poseidon. Where Zeus ruled the skies and Poseidon commanded the seas, Hades presided over the realm of the dead, a kingdom hidden beneath the earth. His power was immense, yet his presence was shadowed, distant, and often feared. One of the greatest secrets was the wealth of the earth itself. Hades was not only the god of death, but also of hidden riches, precious metals, fertile soil, and treasures buried deep underground. While Zeus and Poseidon claimed glory in the open, Hades' power was concealed, tied to the unseen forces that sustained life. His connection to wealth made him both feared and respected, for mortals knew that prosperity and death were bound together in his domain. Another secret lay in his relationship with Persephone, the daughter of Demeter. The monsters of Greek mythology are often remembered through art and poetry, their images softened into symbols or allegories. Yet behind the familiar depictions lay darker, more terrifying forms, shapes that the ancients believed were too dreadful to gaze upon directly. These creatures were not simply enemies of heroes. They were embodiments of chaos, designed to remind mortals of the fragility of order. Among the most feared was Typhon, the monstrous child of Gaia and Tartarus. His body towered over mountains, his arms stretched across horizons, and from his shoulders sprouted serpents that hissed with fire. His voice was said to shake the earth, and his breath scorched the skies. Typhon was not merely a beast, but a storm incarnate, a force so overwhelming that even Zeus trembled before him. The Gorgons, sisters, whose most famous member was Medusa, were described not only with serpents for hair, but with faces so hideous that a single glance turned men to stone. Their wings carried them across the skies. Their tusks gleamed like those of wild boars, and their tongues flickered like serpents. To encounter them was to face death without battle, for their very presence was lethal. The Minotaur, half man and half bull, was more than a creature trapped in a labyrinth. His form was a grotesque fusion, a reminder of unnatural unions and the dangers of defying divine order. His strength was unmatched, his hunger insatiable, and his prison became a symbol of humanity's attempt to contain what should never have existed. Other monsters carried equally dreadful forms. The chimera, with the body of a lion, the head of a goat rising from its back, and a serpent for a tail, breathed fire that consumed armies. The hydra, a serpent with many heads, grew to more for every one severed, its venom so potent that even its breath was deadly. The harpies, winged women with claws of iron, were said to snatch mortals from the earth, leaving only cries of despair in their wake. These real forms were not softened for comfort. They were meant to terrify, to remind mortals that the world was filled with forces beyond comprehension. Heroes who faced them did not merely fight beasts, they confronted chaos itself, embodied in flesh and bone. The Greeks believed that to look upon these monsters was to glimpse the raw truth of existence, that beauty and order were fragile, and that beneath them lay terror waiting to rise. Not every story of the gods survived the passage of time. Some myths were celebrated in epic poetry, carved into temples, and retold for centuries. Others were deliberately erased, softened, or hidden because they revealed truths too unsettling for public memory. These stories revealed a cycle of paranoia and betrayal that the poets preferred to veil, for they showed the king of the gods not as a protector but as a tyrant, repeating the sins of his lineage. There were also myths of forgotten monsters, creatures born from unions too strange to be spoken of. Others were erased because they represented taboos, unions between gods and mortals that ended in horror, or punishments so cruel they threatened to tarnish the image of divine justice. Medusa's name has become synonymous with terror, her image etched into myth as the monstrous Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Yet her story, when traced back through fragments of ancient tradition, reveals a tragedy far deeper than the monstrous mask she was forced to wear. Medusa was not born a monster. She was made one, and her tale is one of injustice, transformation, and sorrow twisted by time. In the earliest accounts, Medusa was a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty. Her hair was said to be her crowning glory, flowing like rivers of gold. But her beauty drew the attention of Poseidon, god of the sea, who pursued her with relentless desire. In one telling, he violated her within Athena's temple, a desecration that enraged the goddess. Yet instead of punishing Poseidon, Athena turned her wrath upon Medusa. The mortal woman was transformed into a Gorgon, her hair replaced with serpents, her face twisted into horror, her gaze cursed to petrify all who looked upon her. The punishment was cruel, stripping Medusa of her humanity and condemning her to isolation. She became a figure of fear, hunted not for her crimes, but for the curse forced upon her. Medusa's end came at the hands of Perseus, who, aided by Athena herself, slew her by severing her head. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior. Even in death, Medusa gave birth to symbols of beauty and strength, a reminder that her essence was not wholly monstrous. Her head, taken by Perseus, was used as a weapon, its petrifying gaze wielded against enemies. Athena placed it upon her shield, turning Medusa's tragedy into a tool of divine power. The story of Medusa is one of the most twisted in Greek mythology. A victim transformed into a monster, punished for a crime committed against her, and remembered not for her humanity, but for her curse. Over time, her tale was reshaped, her victimhood erased, her monstrosity emphasized. Yet, beneath the layers of myth lies the truth. Medusa was a figure of sorrow, a reminder of injustice, and a symbol of how myths can conceal as much as they reveal. Her tragedy endures because it speaks to themes beyond mythology, the silencing of victims, the distortion of stories, and the transformation of suffering into legend. Medusa's gaze may have turned men to stone, but her story turns hearts to reflection, forcing us to see the cruelty hidden within the myths we inherit. Yet the truth behind Pandora's curse is far more complex, shaped by layers of symbolism, cultural fears, and the darker realities of divine punishment. She was not born of mortals, but sculpted from clay, given life, and adorned with gifts from each Olympian. Athena taught her skill, Aphrodite gave her beauty, Hermes granted her cunning, and the Graces bestowed charm. She was designed to be irresistible, a perfect creation, but her perfection concealed a purpose. She was a trap. Zeus, angered by Prometheus' theft of fire for humanity, sought revenge not through direct destruction, but through subtlety. Pandora was sent to Epimetheus, Prometheus' brother, as a bride. Though warned never to accept gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus succumbed to her allure. With Pandora came the jar, later mistranslated as a box, which contained all the evils of the world. When Pandora opened the jar, whether by curiosity or by divine compulsion, the contents spilled forth: disease, sorrow, toil, and death. Humanity, once blessed with fire and hope, was now burdened with suffering. Yet, within the jar remained one final element: Olympus, often translated as hope. Scholars have debated whether hope was preserved as a gift or trapped as another curse, leaving mortals to cling to something fragile and uncertain. The truth behind Pandora's curse lies not in her curiosity alone, but in the god's design. She was created to embody both beauty and destruction, a reminder that gifts from Olympus carried hidden dangers. Pandora's curse was not only the release of evils, but the reminder that humanity's fate was bound to the whims of the divine. The Olympian gods were bound together by kinship, but their family ties were marked not by harmony, but by endless feuds. The myths reveal a dynasty where betrayal was common, vengeance was expected, and bloodlines were torn apart by suspicion and rivalry. These feuds were not minor quarrels. They were battles that shaped the fate of gods and mortals alike. At the heart of these conflicts was the legacy of Cronus and Zeus. Cronus, fearing his children, swallowed them whole, only to be overthrown by Zeus. Yet Zeus himself inherited the same fear, watching his own offspring with suspicion. The cycle of fathers and sons, locked in rivalry, became a defining theme of Olympus, a reminder that power was never secure, even among immortals. The feud between Hera and Zeus was equally destructive. Their marriage, meant to symbolize divine unity, was instead a battlefield of jealousy and revenge. Hera's wrath against Zeus' lovers and children created endless suffering, from the torment of Heracles to the destruction of Semele. Their union was not peace, but perpetual conflict, a blood feud disguised as marriage. Sibling rivalries also scarred Olympus. Poseidon and Athena clashed over the patronage of cities. Their feud most famously seen in Athens, where Athena's gift of the olive tree triumphed over Poseidon's saltwater spring. Apollo and Artemis, though twins, sometimes found themselves at odds, their contests reflecting the tension between light and shadow, male and female, order and wildness. Even minor disputes among siblings carried consequences, shaping the destinies of mortals who worshipped them. The blood feuds extended to the children of gods, the offspring of Zeus, scattered across the mortal world, often became pawns in divine rivalries. Heroes like Perseus, Heracles, and Helen of Troy were caught in struggles that began not in mortal ambition, but in Olympian jealousy. Their lives were marked by curses, trials, and wars that echoed the feuds of their divine parents. These conflicts were not accidents, but reflections of the gods themselves. The Olympians embodied human passions magnified to divine scale: jealousy, ambition, vengeance, and pride. Their blood feuds revealed that immortality did not erase rivalry but intensified it, turning family into battlefield and kinship into curse. The myths of these feuds remind us that Olympus was not a place of perfect order, but of fragile alliances, where every bond carried the risk of betrayal. The gods were united by blood, yet divided by ambition, and their feuds carved sorrow into the fabric of myth, leaving mortals to suffer the consequences of divine rivalry. Among the countless tales of Greek mythology, few are as haunting as those of the children of the gods who were lost, forgotten, or erased from memory. These were not the celebrated offspring who became heroes or rulers, but those whose lives ended in tragedy, whose names faded into silence, and whose stories reveal the darker side of divine parenthood. The gods were prolific in their unions, often leaving behind children scattered across the mortal world. Yet not all were blessed. Some were cursed from birth, marked by the jealousy of Hera, the suspicion of Zeus, or the wrath of other Olympians. These children carried divine blood, but were denied divine protection, their lives shaped by sorrow rather than glory. One such tale is that of Asclepius, son of Apollo and the mortal Coronis. Though he became a healer of unmatched skill, his gift of restoring life angered Zeus, who struck him down with a thunderbolt. His death was not the result of weakness, but of divine fear, for the gods would not allow mortals to escape death. Asclepius was later honored as a god of medicine, but his fate revealed the peril of being born to immortals. Another story tells of Semele's child, Dionysus. Though Dionysus survived, his birth was marked by tragedy. Semele was destroyed by Zeus' divine form, leaving the unborn child to be sewn into Zeus' thigh until he was ready to be born. Dionysus carried the shadow of his mother's death throughout his life, a reminder that divine love often led to mortal loss. There were children who vanished entirely, erased from myth. Some were said to have been hidden away, concealed by gods who feared prophecy or rivalry. Others were destroyed by jealous deities, their names lost to time. These forgotten figures remind us that mythology was selective, preserving tales of triumph while silencing stories of sorrow. The lost children of the gods embody the fragility of divine lineage. They were born into power but condemned by circumstance, their lives sacrificed to the ambitions and fears of Olympus. Their absence is as telling as their presence, for it reveals that even in myth, not every child of the gods was destined for greatness. Their stories, though fragmented, endure as whispers of tragedy. They remind us that divine parenthood was not a blessing but a burden, and that the children of gods were often the first victims of divine rivalry. In their loss, we glimpse the darker heart of mythology, where immortality was purchased at the cost of mortal lives. Love in Greek mythology was rarely gentle, and when it crossed boundaries of law, kinship, or divine decree, it became forbidden. These stories of passion were not celebrated but whispered, for they carried endings steeped in tragedy. The gods and mortals who dared to love against the rules of Olympus found themselves cursed, destroyed, or transformed, their unions remembered not for joy but for sorrow. One of the most haunting tales is that of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, the greatest musician, loved Eurydice with devotion so pure that he descended into the underworld to reclaim her after death. His song moved Hades and Persephone, who agreed to release her on one condition: he must not look back until they reached the surface. Yet love's desperation overcame him. He turned, and Eurydice vanished forever. Their love was forbidden not by law, but by fate itself, ending in eternal separation. Another forbidden union was that of Phaedra and Hippolytus. Phaedra, wife of Theseus, fell in love with her stepson, a passion born of divine manipulation. When Hippolytus rejected her, she accused him falsely, leading to his death by Poseidon's curse. Phaedra, consumed by guilt, took her own life. Their story was not of love fulfilled, but of destruction wrought by desire that could never be allowed. The myth of Apollo and Cassandra also carries the mark of forbidden love. Apollo offered Cassandra the gift of prophecy in exchange for her affection. When she accepted the gift but rejected his love, Apollo cursed her so that no one would believe her visions. Her foresight became torment, her warnings ignored, and her life ended in tragedy during the fall of Troy. Love denied became punishment, and her story remains one of the cruelest twists of divine passion. Even the gods themselves were not spared. The affair of Ares and Aphrodite was forbidden by her marriage to Hephaestus. Their secret meetings ended in humiliation when Hephaestus trapped them in an unbreakable net, exposing them before all of Olympus. Their love was not destroyed by death but by shame, a reminder that even immortals could not escape the consequences of forbidden desire. These stories reveal that love in mythology was a force both irresistible and perilous. When it crossed boundaries, it became a curse, leading to death, madness, or eternal sorrow. The Greeks understood that passion was powerful, but they also believed that it carried danger when it defied the order of gods and fate. The forbidden loves of myth endure not as tales of romance, but as warnings, showing that desire unchecked could unravel lives and bloodlines alike. In Greek mythology, prophecy was not a gift but a burden. The words of oracles and seers carried the weight of inevitability, and once spoken, they could not be undone. Entire families were shattered by visions of doom, bloodlines destroyed by fate that no mortal or god could escape. These prophecies were not warnings to be avoided, but destinies to be fulfilled, and their power shaped some of the darkest stories in myth. One of the most famous examples is the prophecy of Oedipus. Before his birth, it was foretold that he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents, King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes, tried to defy fate by abandoning him as an infant. Yet the prophecy unfolded with cruel precision. Oedipus, unaware of his origins, killed Laius in a chance encounter and later married Jocasta, fulfilling the vision he had sought to avoid. The curse did not end with him. His children carried the shadow of his fate, their lives marked by tragedy and war. Another bloodline destroyed by prophecy was that of the house of Atreus. The family was cursed from the beginning, with Atreus and Thyestes locked in rivalry. A prophecy foretold betrayal, and it unfolded in gruesome fashion when Atreus served Thyestes, his own children, at a banquet. The curse continued through Agamemnon, who sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to appease the gods, and through Orestes, who was driven to murder his mother Clytemnestra. Each generation was bound to violence, each act fulfilling the doom spoken long before. The prophecy of Achilles also carried destruction. It was foretold that he would live a short life filled with glory, or a long life without fame. His mother Thetis tried to protect him, but fate drew him to Troy, where his death was inevitable. His bloodline, though divine, was cut short, and his story became a reminder that even heroes could not escape the words of prophecy. Prophecies also destroyed lesser-known families. Some spoke of children destined to overthrow their fathers, leading to infanticide or abandonment. Others foretold wars sparked by love or betrayal, binding generations to conflict. The Greeks believed that prophecy was not a choice but a truth, and attempts to resist it only ensured its fulfillment. These stories reveal the terrifying power of fate in Greek thought. Bloodlines were not destroyed by weakness alone, but by the inevitability of prophecy. The words of oracles carried authority greater than kings, greater even than gods, for once spoken, they became the fabric of destiny. The destruction of families was not random but written in advance, a reminder that in mythology no one could escape the shadow of fate. Greek mythology is filled with tales of heroes who faced terrifying beasts, lions, serpents, and creatures born of chaos. Yet some of the greatest heroes were not undone by monsters, but by curses, burdens placed upon them by gods, fate, or their own bloodlines. These curses were worse than any battle, for they could not be slain with sword or spear. They were battles of the soul, struggles against destiny itself. One of the most tragic examples is Hercules. Though celebrated for his strength and his 12 labors, his life was marked by Hera's relentless hatred. She cursed him with madness, driving him to kill his own wife and children. His labors, often remembered as feats of glory, were in truth punishments meant to break him. Even after completing them, Heracles was haunted by sorrow, his victories overshadowed by the curse that had destroyed his family. Another hero cursed beyond measure was Achilles. His mother, Thetis, tried to protect him by dipping him in the river Styx, but his heel remained vulnerable. The prophecy of his short life followed him like a shadow. Though he became the greatest warrior of Troy, his fate was sealed: death in youth, glory at the cost of life. His curse was not a monster, but inevitability, the knowledge that every step brought him closer to doom. The story of Orestes also reveals the horror of divine curses. After avenging his father Agamemnon by killing his mother, Clytemnestra, Orestes was pursued by the Furies' spirits of vengeance. His torment was endless, his mind shattered by guilt and divine wrath. Unlike monsters, the Furies could not be fought. They were embodiments of justice, curses that gnawed at his soul until Apollo intervened. Even Odysseus, the cunning hero of the Trojan War, was cursed. His journey home took 10 years, filled with trials sent by Poseidon, who hated him for blinding the Cyclops. Polyphemus, Odysseus, faced storms, shipwrecks, and the loss of his crew, his curse being endless wandering. Though he survived monsters like Scylla and Charybdis, his true suffering was the curse of exile, the endless delay of returning to his family. These heroes remind us that in Greek myth, the greatest struggles were not against beasts, but against destiny. Monsters could be slain, but curses endured, shaping lives into tragedies. The Greeks saw in these stories a reflection of their own fears, that strength and courage were not enough to escape fate, and that sometimes the greatest battles were fought within. Not all myths of ancient Greece were meant to be told openly. Some were celebrated in epic poetry, carved into temples, and passed down through generations. Others were silenced, erased, or reshaped, hidden from the world, because they carried truths too dangerous pieces, too unsettling, or too shameful for the gods and their worshippers. The reasons behind this concealment reveal much about the relationship between mortals, immortals, and the fragile balance of belief. One reason was the preservation of divine authority. Myths that portrayed the gods as cruel, unjust, or vulnerable threatened the image of Olympus. Stories of Zeus' betrayals, Hera's vengeance, or Hades' secret powers were often softened or omitted, ensuring that worshippers saw the gods as protectors rather than tyrants. To question the gods was to question the order of the universe, and so darker tales were hidden to maintain reverence. Another reason was the fear of taboo. Myths involving forbidden unions, cannibalism, or crimes against kin carried themes too disturbing for public ritual. Tales of Cronus devouring his children, or Atreus serving his brother's sons as a meal, were preserved only in fragments, whispered as warnings rather than celebrated as stories. These myths revealed the shadow side of family and power, truths that societies preferred to bury beneath silence. There was also the danger of prophecy. Myths that foretold destruction, betrayal, or inevitable doom were often concealed, for they carried a weight that mortals feared to acknowledge. To know that a bloodline was cursed or a city destined to fall was knowledge too heavy to bear. Yet the fragments that survive reveal the shadows beneath the glory, showing us that the Greeks knew their gods were not perfect, and that truth itself was sometimes too dangerous to endure. Greek mythology is often remembered for its dazzling heroes, mighty gods, and epic battles. Yet beneath the shining surface lies a darker truth. These stories were built on shadows, on betrayals, curses, and horrors that shaped the ancient imagination. The myths were not simply entertainment. They were lessons, warnings, and reflections of a world where power was dangerous and fate was inescapable. The gods themselves were not paragons of virtue, but beings of passion, jealousy, and vengeance. Zeus ruled with thunder, but carried secrets of betrayal. Hera embodied both protection and cruelty. Hades kept mysteries hidden in the depths of the underworld. Even the heroes, celebrated for their strength, were often undone by curses, prophecies, or the wrath of the divine. The monsters, too, were more than beasts. They were symbols of chaos, reminders that order was fragile and that terror lurked beneath creation. Typhon, Medusa, the Hydra, each embodied forces that mortals could never truly conquer. Their presence in myth was a reminder that fear was eternal, woven into the very fabric of existence. And then there were the forgotten stories, the erased myths, the silenced voices. These reveal the darkest heart of Greek mythology, that not all tales were meant to be told, and that silence itself was part of the mythic tradition. What survived was only part of the truth. What was hidden carried shadows even deeper. In the end, Greek mythology is not only about glory, but about fear. It teaches that power comes with danger, that love can be cursed, that fate cannot be escaped, and that even gods carry shadows. The dark heart of these myths beats beneath every story, reminding us that beauty and terror are inseparable. And so, the saga closes. The gods return to their thrones, the monsters to their lairs, and the heroes to their graves. The rivers of the underworld flow quietly, carrying whispers of forgotten tales. The myths rest now, heavy with lessons, waiting for another dawn when they will be retold. It is late, and the stories have spoken. Let the shadows fade, let the mind rest, and let the myths sleep once more. Good night.